Hi, thanks for clicking on this video. This is how I keep making my intros, and I don't know why. Welcome to Faewood Mead. Welcome back if you've been here before. Love ya, appreciate it. Cheers, my dude. This is Noelle. this is Noelle. Noelle, please introduce to these fine people who you are. I'm gonna stop.
My name's Noelle Gray. I study fermentation science. I have my diploma from the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, which is a UK program. My diploma in yeast and fermentation science, and also malt and adjuncts, as well as my general brewing certificate, obviously. I'm geared towards beer and beer production, particularly commercial beer production. I teach commercial craft brewing at Piedmont, Virginia Community College. And I have a wine shop because I started in wine and I will never leave wine, and yeah.
That's good.
So yeah, I have a small little shoebox of a shop. So.
And it's perfect. I love going over. I learn so much every time I'm there. I don't know very much about wine. I also don't know very much about beer, to be honest. So you can look forward to perhaps some beer collabs in the future. Some braggots.
Yeah.
Do some beer things. I drink beer all the time.
Yeah.
And I drink wine too.
Yeah.
Maybe more than mead. I do love mead.
Sacrilege.
Sacrilege.
No, mead is a treat yourself kind of thing. Like it's so precious.
It's very rich.
It's rich, it's precious, you know. That's not a daily drinker.
Yeah.
Wine is a daily drinker. Beer is a daily drinker.
Sometimes you just want to chill out with a nice light beer.
Yeah. On a hot day, on a cold day, a nice rich beer, all good. A beer for every season.
Love it. Yeah, y'all turned in some great questions when I asked. I know this was a couple months ago, and I apologize. You know, it takes me a while to get on top of my stuff sometimes. Anyways, here we are. We're doing it. So we're just gonna stop.
Hammer time.
Let's do this. We're gonna start at the top. All right. I'm just going to say your names as they are, listed or whatever. Okay, we've got at KJ DeVolt. KJ asks, I'm curious about what seems to be the difference in nutritional needs between mead and wine. Sugar obviously has no more nutrients than honey. However, if you see two recipes side by side, the difference being the honey versus sugar, the mead recipe will undoubtedly have nutrient additions, whereas the wine will either have none or very little in comparison. I've been leaning on the side of caution personally and using a step feeding schedule for my wine since learning about the need in mead. Only time will tell if it is beneficial, but I figure it definitely can't hurt. Thanks for your research and work. By the way, thank you, bless.
So as far as wine and mead goes, wine, mead, cider, they're very nutrition poor compared to something like beer. Beer, you have the whole barley kernel. It's kind of pre-packaged everything you want. You know, you've got carbohydrates, you have lipids, you have enzymes. Of course, we help make more enzymes with malting, but that's neither here nor there. But you've got everything that yeast would really need to set them up for a good fermentation. Of course, if you're doing higher gravity, it never hurts to add yeast nutrient for beer as well. Now, where that's different with wine, beer, and mead is you're basically dealing with very simple sugars, glucose and fructose. You're just dealing with the juice, so you're not giving them, the yeast, everything that they would really need, free amino nitrogen, lipids, vitamins, minerals, very important, to set them up for good yeast health, to be able to give you a wonderful fermentation. So that's why you would want to add yeast nutrient. Now, when it comes to the difference between wine and mead, your starting gravity for mead is usually higher. So you're throwing them into like a sugar desert. Like it is a tough environment. So you're definitely gonna wanna add some sort of nutrient that has not just, diammonium phosphate, DAP, but maybe as much other good things as possible, from yeast hulls to other vitamins and minerals.
Now, we did have a question about coffee mill in cold brew, but you wanted to do just a little bit more research on that one.
Yeah, the only thing I've really ever heard is that caffeine can inhibit yeast growth. But before I speak to that more completely, I'd like to do a little more research.
So we've got a question here by Jim Sievers 1770, who asks, please compare and contrast the ancient stir the must with the special stick tradition versus our modern approach of sanitize everything, including the radio in the corner. I would love to hear an academic quantify the risks of wild fermentation. An additional topic would be yeast washing. Is it really a viable method for multiple fermentation runs on the same yeast, or does genetic
drift and or mutations
in the yeast colony lead to other risks?
There's a lot to unpack in this question. One, I'll just speak really quickly as far as yeast washing goes. For meads, ciders, and wines, you're kind of depleting your yeast. Like I said, they don't carry everything that a barley kernel has. So it's a challenging raw material for yeast to deal with. They're kind of one and done. I wouldn't suggest yeast washing or really reusing yeast for a mead. They're doing a lot of heavy lifting and they're pretty much exhausted by the end. But with beer, beer is one of those where you can use multiple generations. In fact, usually by your third generation, that's where the yeast kind of hits its stride. Up to 10 generations is really the sweet spot. You can go more. That's where you start to get into the area of potential genetic drift. So that's really more with beer that you're going to be concerned about that, like petite mutants, where the mitochondria in the yeast actually start to break down, because mitochondria in yeast is actually the DNA, I'm getting too far. The DNA in mitochondria is actually circular instead of a helix shape, so it's weaker, and so you can start to get like petite mutants and things of that nature. When it comes to wine and all these guys, you're just one and done. So I wouldn't bother washing yeast, especially if you don't wash yeast properly. You run the risk of introducing other bacteria or contamination, other microbial contamination into your product. When it comes to ancient ways of fermentation science, absolutely. You could put your cooled liquid out and just welcome wild yeast. There's nothing wrong with that. But they also drank a lot of garbage back then. There's a lot of off-flavor potential. There's a lot of contamination potential. Nothing is pathogenic. That's the good thing about fermentation. That's why it's probably been so successful, is basically your ethanol and your pH, and then consuming all the carbon, the sugar, the energy source, makes a reliably clean, non-pathogenic beverage. Roman army marched on beer. Even if it's like 3% ethanol, that's still enough to drive away anything that is pathogenic. Now, that being said, while your old style stuff isn't going to poison you, it will poison you with bad flavor and be something really not good to like nothing pleasurable. Sanitation is key for doing something of quality and repeatability. Knowing what you're inoculating your liquid with is very important. Now, that being said, you can totally go the other route and do wild ferments. Wild ferments are great. They can be great.
Yeah.
They can also be rotten. They can have all kinds of spoilage microorganisms that just throw gross flavors from, vomit to acetic acid to hydrogen sulfides. I mean, all kinds of things can occur. Just like not every sour beer or natural wine is tasty and delicious, it's the same situation. If you are fine with just rolling the dice and seeing what happens, and that your time isn't a big deal, the money for honey isn't a big deal, that's great. You just want to experiment, that's great. Absolutely do that. But if you want something that's of good, pretty much assured quality and repeatability, you're going to want to use good sanitation. And also the old stick. There used to be these yeast knots where the yeast were actually in the wood themselves, like especially in Nordic areas, where they would re-inoculate like the beer or meat or whatever it was with that yeast knot. So there's a little conflation there. It's not just stirring with just any old stick. There is, like with the ancient practices, some benefit to using like a yeast knot or the old stick, or something that can re-inoculate with things that you want to inoculate it with.
So I'm still wondering what the flapping. It should be fine. It should be fine.
That's so odd.
So I turned off the Zoom, I changed the battery, and then I turned it back on, and the sound level is really low. It was normal, and now it's not.
Click that
Oh, it was like 0. Up to 20? Oh. Okay, secret solved.
All right, so
Now
rack
I'm
level.
normal.
That's good to know.
Now I'm loud as shit. Okay. Sounds good. Oh, I'm so loud.
The only thing I would want to add, as far as like sanitation is concerned, I mean, it really only takes one viable cell of something to get into your wort, your mead, and then just start going to town and propagating and, and
Just
being
one.
a problem. Yeah, I mean, they
God.
divide. So
Yeah.
if it's bacteria, it's, through fission, if it's budding through a wild yeast, but they start chomping down just like the yeast will, and next thing you know, you've got some funky flavors, potentially. Or funky good, depending on what you're going for. So
Next up, we've got the Good Crusader. Do you ever have funny smells when fermenting Sizer? I got the nutrition schedule, and the end product is fine, but the CO2 is much more funky than any of my other meads.
yeast basically will progressively uptake certain nutrients, and they will start utilizing amino acids that contain sulfur initially. So that's why in the beginning of a fermentation, you'll get a lot of sulfur smells being thrown off, depending on the yeast strain, particularly like lager strains, which I know you're probably not using Saccharomyces proceratus, you're probably using Saccharomyces cerevisiae. However, regardless, both strains will throw sulfurs, especially in the very beginning. As long as you're not having that same funk sulfur contamination problem at the end, you're good. Shouldn't be a worry.
All right, we've got Mason Hill 1354 who asks, recently I had a brew that I could not read with a hydrometer. The hydrometer was floating, but it was way below what is readable. I estimate it was at about 0.970. I didn't even know this was possible. Maybe my hydrometer isn't working correctly. I hope the professor can offer me some valuable insight.
I'm not a professor, just a teacher. Yeah, so your hydrometer is in perfect working condition. The specific gravity of water is around 1, it's 0.997. Specific gravity of ethanol, however, is 0.789. So that's why you're gonna get things below the 1. So not a worry.
Oh, wow.
Good things.
I didn't even know that. That's why. We've got Victoria Cleary 3122. How oxygenation affects a brew and how different yeasts produce different esters, flavors, colors.
So oxygen is really important for yeast health, especially at the beginning of fermentation. Basically, what oxygen does is help the yeast with sterol synthesis. And it's kind of like cholesterol. Sterols kind of that helps you envision. It's a waxy kind of thing, and it really helps with the flexibility of the yeast membrane. What's interesting about yeast is they uptake the oxygen, they create the sterols, it makes them more flexible, but that sterile pool is all that they're getting for the rest of fermentation. So with every subsequent daughter cell that you have, they're still sharing in that sterile pool. So their flexibility, their ability to actually bud and reproduce is very deeply entwined with oxygen and having that leg up. That being said, you don't want to have oxygen introduced after, the really 18 hours. You don't want oxygen introduced. It'll just produce a lot of off flavors. Oxygen introduced later will start a potential chain of issues that you might not even notice till 6 months down the road. But that's why you want to limit, but definitely have oxygen in the very beginning. And if it's a really, really high gravity, like, and Mead is, you definitely want to make sure you're in the, at least 10 to 16-ish parts per million dissolved if you possibly can. So if you can get an oxygenation stone with some oxygen, it's a really good idea. Throw that bad boy in there, especially after you've chilled your Mead down.
Yeah.
And because it absorbs better in a cooler temperature. And you're just giving your yeast a budding leg up. As far as esters are organic acids and alcohols that are produced later in the fermentation process. It doesn't have as much impact there. When it comes to colors, if you have oxidized wort or oxidized mead, it will darken. That's how it can show itself later. Same with wine.
Yeah.
It'll get browner. Everything gets browner. Same with beer.
It's good to know.
And it produces off flavors.
Yes.
Like trans-2-nonenal, which is like wet cardboard, so.
Ew.
You don't want that.
You don't want wet cardboard. Baghdaddy 202003. Baghdaddy.
All right.
Why is mead making treated so differently than wine making when it comes to measuring different acids and sulfite levels and dissolved O2 levels? Winemakers are very detailed when it comes to those types of measurements and adjustments, whereas mead makers seem to go almost solely on taste alone.
That's a tough one for me to answer. Remember,
Yeah.
because I don't make mead. I mean, I can answer it, but it's not going to be the best answer. I don't feel good putting that out in the world.
Yeah, I and I don't know what that is. I think just winemakers are more meticulous. It seems to be, anyways. I don't know.
So when it comes, I mean, your sulfite levels,
But those
your
measurements,
dissolved O2, you're going to need more dissolved O2 with a higher gravity. So mead, yeah. Your sulfites are just to knock everything down, and your acids are going to be different because you're making a completely different product.
Game Collector 7930. Why add egg whites to the boil?
Just as fining agents, so proteins, egg whites are full of proteins. If you have tannins in there, they bind and pull out a suspension.
There you go. Easy answer.
But usually you'd also do that at the end, not necessarily with boil. So.
All right. Mitch 9068 from Discord. What is occurring when a large healthy yeast still has sugar left to ferment but not enough of the other required components, aka nutrients, and it begins to die off and become cannibalistic? And what are some of the other chemical byproducts in that situation?
Yeah, so yeast aren't actually, cannibalistic. They're not going out and nom nom nom, like eating each other while they're still alive, or even killing them to eat them. It's not really that kind of situation. But what they will do is when autolysis occurs, basically when cell death occurs, the yeast will drop out, and then the membrane will open up, and basically everything that was in the yeast comes out. Now this is still useful for the living yeast, and they will incorporate that to their metabolism, including like yeast cells, so they have a lot of lipids and fatty acids in them, which is all very useful for the living yeast. And so they'll just clean up what's left. Now there is a point when basically you're always going to have like starvation occur, and then everybody just dies. And then when full autolysis occurs, those yeast will re-release all those flavors that they absorbed, including like diacetyl, sulfur compounds, all kinds of compounds, all the stuff acetaldehyde, like all the things that you want to stay in the yeast. If you leave it on the yeast for too long and everybody dies, then they'll just excrete all that out, and then those compounds will be re-released into your beverage, and it's not a pleasant flavor. So
Blech.
remove, let your yeast fall out of suspension, and then remove your liquid, whether it's cold crashing or some sort of fining agent. It'll make it more stable, and it will help prevent certain off flavors. You don't want to move it off too quickly though, because yeast do clean up after themselves. Like diacetyl is a perfect example. During the metabolism of the creation of like valine and leucine and isoleucine, certain amino acids, acetolactate is excreted out, alpha-acetolactate, and through oxidative decarboxylation, you get diacetyl. And if you're not familiar with diacetyl is that like butter popcorn flavor that they literally use for movie theater buttered popcorn. So if you want that to be in your beer, then remove your yeast too quickly and you'll get diacetyl.
Last question would be from BC, aka Doing the Most. Y'all are probably quite familiar with him. How is vinegar purposefully made?
Vinegar, the main component in vinegar is acetic acid. And there are several different things that can produce acetic acid, most notably acetobacter. Acetobacter is microaerophilic, meaning it likes a little bit of oxygen to get going, and that's why you can have certain like beer spoilage. Again, I'm referencing beer because that's, any other kind of spoilage, wine spoilage, where that acetic acid, that vinegar flavor is made. Pectinatus can also excrete acetic acid. So can Brettanomyces, which is a wild yeast. They can all excrete acetic acid. Basically, if you want to make vinegar, I would go out of your way to inoculate it with acetobacter. Give it a little bit of air. Next thing you know, you'll have a yummy vinegar. Now, I have not made vinegar before on purpose. So, and I'm sure an actual professional vinegar maker could speak more to it than I can. In a lot of wild ferments, Pediococcus and Lactobacillus, and those are both lactic acid producing bacteria. So if you want to sour something in that way, you would use those guys.
Well, thank you all so much for turning in questions. If you have more, please leave them in the comment section. And I'll have this lovely gal back to answer them. Because she's dope like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been marvelous.
Of
You make
course.
the best mead. I love it. I feel so privileged.
Thank you.
It's been good.
Thanks. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you. Appreciate all your knowledge, your brain. Just want to like attach something to it and suction all of that into my brain. So much. I always learn new things when I'm with Noelle over here.
Good hangs. Solid hangs.
Yes. All right. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you. We'll see you next time. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Get stressed out.
Shit.
Sorry.
Oh God.
Yes, drink up. Drink up.
That's how we do.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. That's
Thank you.
so good. I'm sorry.
Thank
I
you.
didn't, like drink up. Like.
Oh, I'm
Just-
very happy with how it turned out.
Oh my gosh, it's good.
I like that a lot. Very chill.
It's just hitting the spot right now. It's perfect. Okay.
Good. All right.
Ooh.
Okay, yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for... Fuck, I did it again.
No.
Thanks for clicking.
Fuck all.
Thank you for fuck. Okay, yeah. Hi, welcome to Faewood Mead. Shit. I
think you should
keep
just do this
forgetting.
uncut.
I
Like,
keep
just
forgetting.
throw the whole thing up. I think it's perfect.
It's perfect how it is. Just keep messing it up and it's fine. Yeah, all right. First he's drinking.
Slurp.
He needs his water. That's fine.
Is it good?
You
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. That's some good water.
You done, sir?
He's refreshed.